And welcome to Enjoy Parenting, the podcast where we teach you how to get more enjoyment out of one of life's greatest values, your children. I'm Kyle Steele, father of two, and my co-host is Lisa VanDamme, mother of four. And the title for today's episode is going to be Politics, an age-restricted substance. And Lisa, this was your idea to bring up the topic. When is it appropriate to discuss politics with children, and how should you handle children discussing politics? So is there anything that brought that to your mind that made you want to talk about it, or any particular frame you want to put on the question?
Sure. It's a topic that comes to mind quite often for me, but I hadn't thought of it as in the context of this show and as something important to discuss until just recently. There's lots of angles we could take on it, but the two that come to mind first are, since we have at school, we abide by what we call the principle of hierarchy, that when we're teaching our subjects, we try to always do so with respect for the order in which knowledge must be acquired for it to be true, independent, earnest, individual knowledge. So we want to be careful never to just hand our students conclusions that are floating and meaningless and basically memorize jargon for them. We want to make sure that, to the best of our ability, that anything they are learning is something that they deeply understand for themselves. So since that's
a good example of this, it would be from science, just teaching them that everything is made up of atoms with a proton, a neutron, and an electron. If you just give that fact to them and show them a picture, that's unconnected to anything in their reality. It's an unhierarchical presentation of that concept. But we apply this to politics, and you want to discuss that a bit too.
So related to that, it's pretty unique, I think, to our school that we have a policy against current events discussions or current events projects. Those, I think, are usually a staple, even of lower elementary education. That you come in and present something about a current event to your class, or that the teacher will bring current events discussions into the classroom themselves. And part of what just brought that to mind is I've been reading a book recommended by a friend called Undoctrinate, which is about how politics is completely taken over the classroom. So that's one of the things that brought this to mind. But we're going to discuss it in a parenting context. The other thing is that there seems in our culture to be such a premium placed on activism, that we want young people to have a spirit of getting involved in the issues of the day, and that's the activism itself is something that can sort of be enshrined independent of the content and level of understanding of the thing they're being activists about. So that's something that I think definitely dominates classrooms today, but also maybe even a little bit the home life for a lot of people too. That there's some satisfaction taken in having your child not be apathetic or care about the issues of the day and have opinions and want to be involved in. And I guess the idea is that you're sort of setting them up to want to do this later as adults, when they can really have a voice in the cultural discussion, cultural conversations, and in their ability to vote. But anyway, so those are the thoughts that brought it up, and then I have definite ideas about how I think it's best for parents to approach this issue.
What I think we should do, though, is kind of really set out exactly what we mean when we say that there's a hazard for kids encountering politics too early. So you've brought up a couple of examples. If a teacher is pontificating about current events, that can be a real violation, because they're essentially giving them opinions about things that the kids have no basis to judge. Like if I just start spouting off about Ukraine to the kids right now, they don't know anything about the history of Ukraine or of Russia or NATO. They don't really understand the geography that's influencing Russia's actions, or is Ukraine the bastion of freedom or not. They don't have much of a basis to really evaluate what I'm talking about there. And it's can be a playground for me to essentially propagandize or indoctrinate. And then another thing that you're highlighting is that there is a unhealthy desire some families have to see their child become political at a very young age as a sort of like a morals badge of honor. And what that ultimately means is that you're getting them to act out things that they don't really have an understanding of, whether it's, marching in a protest or getting involved with some kind of a activist charity organization. Now, there can be better ways to do that. Like if they're helping to raise money for an animal shelter, I think a younger child can understand what is the animal shelter doing and what's the money going to accomplish. But not respecting the everything it takes to have an informed political opinion. That's got to come first before politics gets introduced into a child's life in a serious way. Now, the stuff that we're mentioning, though, these are examples that I think of as happening more in like preteen and teenage years. Are there any examples of unhealthy politics in more like the elementary years that you can think of? Like, I guess there's just parents can sit their kid down and say, no, this is Donald Trump, and this is what we think about Donald Trump. As it's almost like it's not really a political discussion at that point. It's just imparting your worldview and your taboos to the child. Is there anything else that you can think of that would be how this issue shows up at younger ages? Or is it more kind of just more the same?
It's a delicate subject, but I think the issue of masks is a good one. I don't know what your experience has been, but I have noticed that now both you and I have made very clear that we do regard masks as an imposition on the child and as something that's very detrimental to their experience at school, and have tried to make sure that fact is introduced into the conversation about whether and when it's appropriate to ask children to wear masks at school. But what I've noticed is that people who early on had very strong opinions about masks and voiced those opinions very strongly at home, the effect on their children was that the burden of masks became much more intense than I think it might have been otherwise. So
specifically families that were critical of masks, the more they talked about that at home, it became more burdensome for the kids to have to wear masks when they were required to at school and other places.
And I think there would be a way to appropriately acknowledge the burden on the child of wearing a mask. And if I, in my own case, I would try to do my best to make clear what the argument is on the other side, and, to give it the most credibility that I could, so that they understand that there are arguments on both sides of this debate. And then I would make clear, here's my own feeling about it. And in the simplest terms I could, I'd tell them why if this was a topic that came up. But when it becomes something with that kind of centrality of focus and that vehemence behind it, it can really compromise the child's experience. And it didn't come off that the child was so persuaded by what their parents had said that now the experience was different for them. It just became such a focus for them.
So those are the sorts of things that we're criticizing here. And the hazards, I can see two main hazards to this, like the consequences. And I'm curious if you have more than this. Like, one we've already alluded to is that this is unfair to politics. Politics deserves better than ignorant opinions, and politics should be treated with more reverence than that. And political discussion shouldn't just be like when you introduce politics very young to children, the message that sends is, this isn't very hard. You can have an opinion really easily.
Yeah.
And the world can be divided into very simple who's good and who's bad, and it all has to do with whether a mask is on your face. And now that's a bit of a caricature, but to the more that you are violating that hierarchy, the more you send the message that politics are not nuanced, politics are not hard. The other hazard I see is that kids that spend their time thinking about these political things, it becomes a distraction from what they really should be doing, the world they should be exploring, and the values they should be developing that are more appropriate to their age. So if a child is spending a lot of time on, I just keep thinking of masks because that's all I think about at this point in time. But if they're getting wrapped up in I don't know, a BLM issue when they're 8 years old, they're not spending their time developing the social interactions or the values in their own life that will be meaningful experiences that inform future political opinions. So those are the two hazards I see. I don't know if you see other sorts of hazards or harms that come from this early introduction of politics to kids.
Yeah, so there's the habituating indoctrination. So giving them the sense that their opinions can just be handed down to them from one generation to the next. So that's one. There's the that's related to, but yes, a little bit distinct from the idea that this is all easy. There's no body of knowledge or set of experiences that you need to be able to inform a good judgment in these realms. So either you're just going to inherit them, or you can just sort of arbitrarily devise them of your own. And that what matters is that you have an opinion. It doesn't matter how well grounded that opinion is. So an encouragement to unfounded opinion making. The other, this is sort of what you said, but I think just a slightly different aspect of it. A lot of those issues can be psychologically burdensome, unpleasant for the child because they don't have the means to grapple with them. So you're giving them something too big too soon. If we were having extensive conversation with them about the war in Ukraine right now, that I think that's, it's a scary topic for anybody, but I think for a child, it's so far out of their experience and they have so little knowledge of history and of what and society that it just it's a big,
makes me think
big
of a story from my own childhood that underlines this, that the earliest memory I can remember of anything political was the first Gulf War. And I would, when was that? Was that like 92 or something like that? Or it was earlier than that? I'm not sure. I was like, 6 years old or something. And I had no sense of geographic scale. So I thought that all those missiles that I saw on the news were like next door or in the next county over. And I was terrified. I had nightmares for a while that, there's going to be a bombardment in Pigeon, Michigan, population 1,100. And so just, that's a more absurd example of this, but just the burden that you can take on by introducing these things that kids are not prepared to grapple with. And I don't think my parents would have even anticipated that little Kyle's not going to realize that this is happening on the other side of the world. So it does burden kids with problems that they have no ability to handle. And that can kind of give them a pretty toxic worldview that, wow, the world's just full of grave, terrible injustices and there's nothing I can do about it. And it all just kind of sucks. But I can take solace in how loudly I complain about it.
Right. There's my older daughters will remind me sometimes of the change to my own parenting standards. Sometimes I think I need to go back to, there's the, I think the cliche is that the second child always gets off way easier than the first. But now I'm down to number 4 and there's a lot of time between them. So my parenting standards may have degraded too much. I remember when Lana, my eldest, now 22, was little, that I showed her the movie Bambi. This is tangentially related, but I'll come back to the point. I showed her the movie Bambi and I don't know. Do you remember the movie?
Oh, sure.
At all?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's terrifying and traumatizing, and we got to the
Mm.
point that the mother is killed, and she just started inconsolably sobbing, and I was like, "What have I done to my child?" Showing her this movie, and I at the time decided that Disney movies in general were not what I wanted to show my children because the scale of the values is so enormous. Like it is good versus evil on this epic
Mm.
scale, so far out of the range of their true life experiences. And I remember at the time I had a distinct preference for the show Blue's Clues, which
Mm.
was like something is lost in the backyard and he has to look for 3 clues to be able to find it. And that just seemed like so much healthier of a entertainment value for my child because that's imitates the scale of the experiences that she actually has. Now, I'm not going to argue that there's no value in Disney movies and for young children, but there's some kernel of truth there that
Yeah.
keeping discussions, art, education, on the scale of what the child actually can understand and grapple with and has experience with in their life seems like a good rule of thumb. And then we gradually stretch that over time. And then at a certain point, they get to a point that the whole world is open to them. But you want to wait until that's really appropriate.
Now, I have an experience with one of your kids that is a little bit of a counterpoint to this, but I think it'll be an interesting counterpoint.
Okay.
So I was alone with Seth one time after school. And how old is he now? Is he 9 or 10, 11? 9. Okay. He seems like he's older. And he was talking to me about masks. And I can't remember exactly what he said, but it was a really precocious question of like, why do we still have these rules when it seems like they're not very effective, or something along those lines, which is, at least a politically adjacent question.
Sure.
And I explained, now I studied political theory and public choice. And so I have, this is something I have fun talking about. And so I explained to him a little bit of the game theory that imagine you're a public health official and you don't know exactly what the rules should be. But if you're too cautious, people will be annoyed with you. And if you're not cautious enough, people will die. Where are you going to skew? How's that going to skew your guess? And I am talking politics with him. I'm actually explaining, political science to him at a really low level. But he's a pretty smart kid, and I felt like it was a good conversation. He could understand that a little bit better, that incentives influence decision making. So even though we're here saying let's not comment on politics in the classroom, and it can be too abstract for them, I felt really good about that conversation. So I don't know how to square that circle, and I'm curious what your take would be on that. Maybe I'm just deceiving myself because I thought I sounded smart in the conversation.
It did sound smart. I feel good about that conversation as you describe it too. And what seems to me key there is you're calibrating it according to the individual child. Now, I will say that I think a lot of people overestimate their children's capabilities, in part because they want to overestimate them. Like, no, he's totally ready to be a political activist, so I'm going to feed him with the information he needs. But I don't think that's what you're doing. So calibrating the conversation to this child seems like he would be interested in and could comprehend this defined point that I want to try to make. I think that's one part of it. The other part of it that seems key to me is he asked you a question. So I definitely don't think that these topics should be avoided or we should give them a sense that there's a taboo to discussing them, or just tell them, no, come back to me in 10 years and maybe we can talk about it then. I think it's okay to when a child asks a question, to give a simple answer. The most accessible answer you can of your understanding of that issue, and then calibrate how the conversation continues according to what their reaction is to it. But the other hazard that occurred to me that comes up here is I would always want to be careful not to give my opinion in a way that makes it seem like I, and therefore they, if they agree with me, are at odds with the world. Like that this is, people put so much passion behind their convictions, and there's so much of a sense that of that us versus them that's so pervasive in our culture right now, that it's so easy to recruit your child to that team. And I think it's so destructive to them in the long run. So the answer that you gave was not inflammatory in that way at all. You were not recruiting him to any team. You were trying to explain one of the principles that might inform the situation that he was asking about.
Now, that's an interesting thing that you're introducing here, that the way that we explain politics to kids ideally is going to be less inflammatory and more neutral, or more fair and balanced. And I embrace that. Like when I was a history teacher, I always had, my motto was that everything that happened in the past made sense to people that were just as smart as you and thought they were doing the right thing. And so when my students would laugh at, what people did in the past, I'd be like, if you're laughing at history, you're not quite getting it. You need to know, why did it make sense for people at the time to kill all of the cats in the Black Death? And then we laugh because that made it worse. Or why did they think that it made sense to have a whole hierarchy of nobility? And so that's something that I embrace when I'm trying to explain these things to kids, because I think it will make them sharper and enrich their minds to be able to think that way. Now, they can probably see where I come down on history. I'm not in favor of killing cats when there's a plague. Then we're starting to get into a really big philosophical topic of, why do we want to be neutral in our presentation of certain things instead of promulgating what we think is morally right? Well, and maybe that's bigger than we have time for right now.
Sure, but can I suggest a slight difference? Because I think there's definitely a difference between the way I would answer that question in the classroom and the way I would answer it to my own children. So I don't pretend not to have an opinion. I don't pretend not to have an opinion with my students, but I don't want my opinions known to my students when it comes to political issues or philosophic issues. But with my kids, I would not shy away from making clear what my feeling was about it, if I thought that they could understand the reasoning that I was giving them at all. But I would explain it. I would take the time to explain the different opinions that exist about this topic, to say, here's what I think, and this is why I think that. So I would be doing my best to model the thinking process about the issue in terms that they could understand, while still not making it sound like the people who believe something different are the devil, and they're your enemy. And there's this, deep antagonism that's going to exist between you and so much of the rest of the world, that to just give them a kind of, to model the right approach to deal with other people too, and differences of opinion.
Yeah. And it's important to note there that when you take that approach, when you try to get, you don't hide your opinion, I think that the mass policy should be X, but here's why a reasonable person would be doing what you see right now. What happens there is you are making a better argument for your opinion. And so you're going to be more strongly imparting that to the child. And second is, you're going to be modeling, it's going to be easier for them to navigate different people in the world if you model a habit of projecting why a reasonable person might disagree with you. That makes it much easier to get through life than if you just say, yeah, I know, everyone that disagrees with us is just rotten and evil and stupid. It's good luck in life, kid. Right. That's the toolkit you've got. Right. I had one more topic that related to this I wanted to get to. I feel like I've been in the driver's seat a little bit here. Is there more that
Yeah,
you've
that's
had on
great.
the
The
agenda?
only thing I wanted to make sure I had a chance to comment on is um, this premium placed on activism or having opinions. I
Mm,
feel like it's so important for kids to develop a healthy dose of humility about
mm,
having opinions that
mm.
they that I don't, it's such an interesting thing. It seems so wrong on the face of it to me to teach them, no, it's great to have opinions. You don't have to be able to ground them, you don't have to be able to back them up. Passion is what matters, but that seems to be the underlying message in so much of education, and
Mhm.
even often in conversations among parents and their kids. So uh, I just I would like to see so much more. And this is another thing I think we have to model as individuals. If we're talking about politics to our kids, expressing the limitations of your own understanding, I think, is a really important thing. So if they ask
Mhm.
about your opinion on something, saying, well, maybe not even just stating what your opinion is, but saying, this is my opinion to the best of my understanding, and maybe even expressing where you might be making a mistake, or what further knowledge you might need in order to really have an informed opinion about this.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem to be. I'd like to see that become a fad
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
counteract this rabid opinion making.
Yeah, because we got to remember that politics is about violence, that politics is about real, like serious winners and losers. And so you don't want to treat that with um with I don't know, callous disregard for other people and blind passion. There's a connection I'm making that's going to be a little bit circuitous, but I really think it's important here. One of the things I remember, this is from a long time ago, is a John David Lewis lecture where he was comparing Roman culture and American culture. And he said that both of them are agonistic cultures, that they're cultures that are, and I think Greek as well, they're driven by competition, by finding out who is the best. And he said that one of the great things about American culture is that we have found ways to be agonistic, and to have competition that's not destructive. And he highlighted business and sports as being the two best examples of people can be passionate and have a drive and can work really hard towards something, but it's not a zero-sum game in that. Because even though there's only one winner in a sports game, there's still, the pleasure of sport for both parties.
Yeah.
And so the thing is, there is something really beautiful about seeing your child passionate and engaged and driven for something, and feeling just like even like a moral. I would be more cautious about this, but even like a moral zeal for something can be really very beautiful. But I wouldn't pick politics, because politics is not where you want that moralizing zeal very often. It's very rare that you want that. What you want more often is sober, careful deliberation. And so if you want passionate zeal, if you want that beauty in your child's life, I think you need to find some healthier places to foster that. And I would say like sports and certain hobbies are going to be the main place for that. So yeah,
That raises
it's
very interesting
yeah.
questions about what you do when your child comes to you with moral zeal for something you think is really hierarchically inappropriate. And
Have you had that experience, and can you share it without
that's a good
compromising
question.
anyone?
Well, I don't think I can in 2 minutes. I'd have to reflect on it. Um, I mean, let's see. I don't, that maybe this doesn't exactly fit that mold, but I'll just tell this one story. So Lana and Greta are at a very Catholic college.
Mhm.
The question, inevitably, the question at some point, I think for both of them, has come up whether they ought to convert to Catholicism. I don't know if that's a surprise. It doesn't surprise me. It's a beautiful school with a lot of beautiful people, and
We're making the best arguments Catholicism
making the
has to
best
offer.
arguments there are. So my reaction at the time was not at all to fight against their conclusion. It was to be open to a discussion about it to the extent that they wanted to hear what my thoughts were about it. But I did say to them, well, I just want to make a recommendation that you've been immersed in a kind of in a particular environment that's pretty uniform ideologically for 4 years. So I want to make a recommendation that you wait 4 years outside of college when you're having other influences in your life and make your decision at that point. But it was a very non-confrontational, non-combative way to try to, I don't know, give them some time to process this with more influences. And I think that was an conversation.
What you're doing there is you're not trying to take away their ability to make the decision, and you're not even trying to influence what decision they make. You're just trying to give them guidance about how they can best make a good decision.
And the other thing that seems key there that made it connect in my mind to the question you asked is just not condescending to them or belittling something that at that moment in time was probably very important to them. So I would never want a parent to belittle what developmentally for that child at that moment, given the influences that they've encountered, seems important to them. We want to figure out ways to help steer them with our own wisdom, but being careful not to belittle their understanding as it is at any given point, I think is really important.
There's a theme here that I feel like we're picking up in many episodes that I'll just try to mention briefly since we're a little over time. One of the biggest keys to being a parent, sadly, there's no way around this, is you have to be wise about the things that might give you trouble. It'll be easier to talk about politics with your kids if you are very knowledgeable about your own politics. If your grasp of your own politics is weak, then you're going to kind of be like upset that they are coming to the wrong conclusions and you don't know what to do about it. And then you're reaching for more draconian ways to coerce them. And then the same thing applies to piano practice. If you are very good with hobbies and keeping up with things, you're going to be in a much wiser place to give advice to kids on how to stick to these hobbies. But if you don't know that very well, if you are the kind of person that quit things a lot, you're going to have a poor toolkit for helping your kid to not quit. So unfortunately, the key to good parenting is good personing. With that, maybe sad note, I think we can say goodbye here, and we'll go to Clubhouse if anyone wants to join us.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.